my channel. Today's video is just about explaining a bit about my journey with autism, and I will explain a few situations that I've struggled with growing up in my journey with autism, and how having my diagnosis helps me and how my diagnosis makes me feel to this day. So I hope you enjoy the video. So this was my video explaining a bit about my journey with autism. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have got a diagnosis in autism, or if you know someone that has a diagnosis in autism, whether it's a family or a friend, share this video with them. Let me know what you think of this video, like any feedback you have. And I hope it helps. I hope it helps someone to feel less alone in their struggles. I love raising awareness, and I love helping others to feel less alone. So hopefully this video did that aim, met that aim somehow. And let me know what other content you want to see in my next videos, and I will put my awareness accounts in the description box thing below, and I will see you in my next video. Bye. So I was very young when I first got taken to get a diagnosis of autism, which I didn't get because when my parents took me to get diagnosed, they just basically said that what's normal then probably wouldn't be normal in a few years' time, and they told my parents to take me to get diagnosed again in a few years' time. But the reason why my parents wanted to get me diagnosed when I was young, so probably about the ages of like 4 or 5, I don't exactly know how old I was, but they wanted to get me diagnosed because when I had these figures like Legoland, or this brand of figures called Happyland, if you've heard of it, with any figures I had, I would line them up or set them out in certain ways, whether it was on a tray or in a playhouse, like in a little like playhouse for figures at my grandparents' house. Whatever I do with them, I'd always line them up or have them set out in a certain way. So my parents must have thought, okay, this is a bit weird, why is my daughter doing this with these figures? So they obviously took me to get diagnosed, and the doctor or whoever they took me to see basically said to them that I wasn't autistic, but that I was just Caitlin. So in between my diagnosis, this is another thing that I just thought to mention, but in between being taken to get diagnosed when I was young and actually getting my diagnosis, I also got diagnosed with another condition called DAMP when I was about 10. And for those of you who don't know what DAMP is, it stands for Deficits in Attention and Motor Control Disorder. I don't exactly know much about it, but whenever I do, I'll try to do a video explaining that as well, even though it's hard to explain. And I will definitely do another video explaining a bit about meltdowns and shutdowns, which are two things I experience a lot with my journey in autism. So looking back on my life and a lot of things I've struggled with as a child and growing up, looking back on a lot of things makes sense to me, and a few things I've struggled with growing up in my life are social situations, friendships, dealing with the process of any changes in my life, and sensory overload, like to do with loud noises and everything like that. So with my sensory overload, I've always struggled with the loud noises, like fireworks. I've never liked. When I used to see fireworks on bonfire night, I would wear earmuffs because it was just so loud. I couldn't cope with the noise. I couldn't cope with the noise of hand dryers, and I couldn't cope with the noise of fire alarms. And this is also linked to a bit of my hearing as well, because when I was younger my hearing wasn't great, so I used to have grommets in my ears. And there was one point where I had an operation to help improve my hearing, so it was definitely because of that as to why everything was so loud, but it was definitely the sensory part of autism as well. So after I had this operation, everything was just so loud to me. Like if a plane was flying over, I'd feel so anxious even 5 minutes before it actually came over. Like I could hear a plane before anyone else in my family could. And I'd be so anxious, and they'd be like, why is she acting like this? Why is she so scared? And then 5 minutes later, a plane would come over, and then they'd be like, oh, that makes sense. This is why she's scared. And I've also struggled with public toilets because of fire alarms and hand dryers. The amount of stress I've probably put my mum through with refusing to go in public toilets. Like if we were traveling to see family or traveling on a holiday and I got asked, do you need to go to the toilet? I'd be like, no, and I'd refuse to go in a public toilet if it had a fire alarm or a hand dryer in as well. And to this day, personally, I think I've gotten better with dealing with sensory overload, because I love going to concerts, but I still get really, really, really overwhelmed with the noise there when like everybody's screaming. Like I don't mind the music because I love listening to music, but when everybody's like screaming at the top of their lungs, it's like really overwhelming for me. So sometimes, not all the time, sometimes I have like these little earphone things which I put in my ears, so the screaming is less loud for me. So that is one thing I've struggled with growing up. Another thing I've struggled with is change. So there has been loads of changes in my life, from going to 3 different primary schools and then transitioning from primary school to high school. I've never been that bad with changing schools because it's like happened a lot, so it's just something I've always gotten used to when growing up, with going from one primary school to the second to the third. And obviously because I've changed primary school 3 times, going to high school, it just felt like going to another primary school but a bigger school. But with certain changes, like if someone would say to me, right, we are doing this today, we are going here on this day, and then I got told actually we're going here, the change of like going to a different place, I'd feel confused or angry or upset, because I'd set this thing in my head, right, we're doing this today, and if I got told actually we're not doing that, it would stress me out. So I'd feel so stressed and confused and angry or upset, but I wouldn't know how to express that it was the way I felt about it. And I couldn't even say to like a family member or a friend, I feel confused, I feel angry. So I would be like I get so angry inside and have this feeling inside of me from feeling confused and angry. So that's another thing I've always struggled with growing up, and I still struggle with that to this day. And the last 2 things that I struggle with, which I'm gonna kind of talk about together, are social situations and friendships. I've always struggled with social situations and friendships growing up because I've never been good at engaging or like starting conversations, carrying on conversations. I'm really quiet, and I tend to keep myself to myself. And when I talk to someone or have a conversation with someone, I tend to repeat myself a lot, or I tend to not understand certain things that they say. So I've never been good at making friends in primary school or high school, and I've never been good in social situations. Like for example, a birthday party, I'd always feel stressed at a birthday party with loads of people, especially with loads of people I didn't know, because I wouldn't know who to talk to, I wouldn't know what to say to someone, and it was very stressful dealing with friendships and social situations growing up, because I never knew the right thing to say, and I would always feel so embarrassed about saying the wrong thing to anyone. So they are the four main things I've always struggled with growing up, and also looking back on other aspects of my life about, for example, the repetition in the food I eat. So, for example, I would have the same food, whether it was a meal or a snack, for a certain amount of days or weeks. And it was really weird. But looking back on everything, it definitely all makes sense. And when I actually got my diagnosis in autism, which I was so happy about, I got my diagnosis 2 years ago. And how I got my diagnosis, it felt really weird. It felt like it was an interview, but it wasn't. Like, there was a sheet that they had, and they were like ticking or writing down or doing whatever they did on that sheet. And I can't remember all the questions that they asked me, but they were asking me questions about friendships, how I find socializing or social situations. I think they asked me about like preferences or about foods or something. They asked me a lot of questions which they filled out on the sheet, and then I feel like the assessment went so quick. They just basically said, well, they didn't actually say it, but it felt like they were just like, oh yeah, you have autism, goodbye. And I feel like they could have done like a lot more, or said a lot more information about trying to help me. And I feel like they could have definitely given me a lot more advice on how to cope and what other support I could have got. But having my diagnosis really helped me to understand myself so much more than I used to, because 2 years ago, before I got my diagnosis, I wouldn't have been able to explain to a friend or a family member, this is how I feel in a certain situation, because I wouldn't even understand what was going on in my own head. I would be confused. I wouldn't know how to explain that. But now, with having my diagnosis, if I feel uncomfortable or stressed in a situation, I can actually tell someone about that and why. I can understand what's going on in my own head, so I know how to take time for myself, and I know what's best for me in certain situations as well, so I can help myself a lot more than I used to. And the best advice I have for anyone who is getting a diagnosis in autism or have had a diagnosis in autism, the best advice I have is to always be yourself. Never change yourself for anyone, because you are amazing the way you are. You are the way you are for a reason. Even though there will be people out there who will unfortunately judge or who won't understand what autism is, never change yourself, because you are perfect the way you are. And telling myself that every day has definitely helped me to be myself a lot more. And even though I may seem or come across or act much more childish, I love being myself. It makes me happy, and having the right people around me to support me, to help me, who understand me and who don't judge me. I'm just so thankful for everyone around me who has supported me on this journey. So thank you to everyone who supported me. I love you all very much. And even though I feel happy about having my diagnosis and with understanding myself a lot more, there are really hard moments which I always struggle with, like for example with my shutdowns. And whenever I have a shutdown, it's embarrassing, especially in a public area, because you never know what anyone will say when you have a shutdown in public. You never know how anyone will react. And if I'm with friends in like a shopping centre, a cinema, or anywhere, whenever I go out with a friend, and if it happens, I'd feel a burden on a friend, because they won't know what to do in the situation at all, because shutdowns are something that are controllable, that is uncontrollable. Like, when it happens, you can't control it, you can't stop it, so it just kind of happens. And it's so like there's nothing you can really do to stop it, and it is really stressful. And especially when it happened in unfamiliar settings. Like, for example, I went on a trip to Seville this year with college, and when I went on this trip, I had 4 or 5 shutdowns, and if it was all too much, I felt really bad about it, because obviously I felt a burden to my teachers, to my friends, and to the other students on the trip. But having the right support in those moments of the shutdowns really helped me. So